behind the scenes, it was a small group of people that were doing everything.
Welcome back to the GTM podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker.
I want to know how this insane growth actually happened.
Hello and welcome back to the Go-to-Market podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker. Thank you, as always, for choosing to hang out with us. I know there's 1,000,001 podcasts, and we appreciate you lending us your eardrums for the next 45 minutes. We always try and talk to real revenue leaders who are still, in seat doing the thing, and tease out tactics, strategies, and stories that have worked for them, that they've been through. And this is going to be a really fun episode. Been looking forward to it for a while. I am joined by Eran Aloni. Eran, welcome.
Welcome, Scott. Nice to be here.
Good to have you. Good to have you. And so for the listeners, Eran is the EVP of Product Strategy and Ecosystem at Gong. Previously, was actually the CCO and COO at Gong, which is a pretty heavy-duty role. I can imagine you didn't sleep too much during that time period.
Never.
Never, not once. But a funny little, anecdote for the listeners is not only is Eran an incredible revenue leader, an LP and GTM fund, but his son, Amit, interned for GTM fund while he was studying at UBC, which is, our school in Vancouver. And he did such a fantastic job during his internship that we actually hired him as an analyst. So I hang out with your son much more than I do with you, which is pretty funny.
Yeah, you probably hang out with him more than I do at this point, but yes.
It's true. Almost every day I can see him from my office right now. You know what? That might be a fun place to start the podcast, is if you're talking to Amit right now, and many listeners might be in Amit's position where they're just starting out their career. What's one piece of advice you would give your son as he's, in his first year of figuring out tech, VC, this whole new landscape?
The advice that worked for me, and it's not for everyone, right, is actually not spending too much time planning things in minute details. It's very difficult to know where you're just getting started, or frankly, for me, even after many years of being in the business, where would life take you? Where would your career take you? What would be your passion in a few years from now? What would the industry look like? So for me, and my advice to a lot of people, is make the most of where you are now, try to learn as much as possible, but keep your horizons open. Opportunities would come. You may find yourself interested in something that you've never thought you'd be interested in, and just, double down on where you see an opportunity and where you see, that you can learn and you can really go deeper on. If you had asked me 15 years ago if I would run like a big revenue team, that was as far as where, I thought I'll be. And it was an amazing ride, and I enjoyed it, and I learned a lot. So you never know where you're going to end up.
I think that's fantastic advice. I feel like if you're too rigid in your 5-year plan or 10-year plan, you're so myopically focused on like that end goal that you can miss a lot of opportunities that are just naturally coming up in your periphery. So I think that's great. And yeah, don't try and over-engineer it. Bias toward action. Keep moving. Keep learning. I think that's great for anyone starting their career, and good advice for actually anyone, even if you're later in your career. Well, Eran, one of the things I think you have a super unique purview on, particularly in this new role, designing a lot of product strategy at Gong and looking across the entire ecosystem, is of course artificial intelligence has been top of mind for you probably for many years. Or I know so for in many years, but in the last, we'll say, year or two, things have accelerated quite dramatically, pretty rapidly. And we're seeing incumbents in the we'll call them incumbents. I remember when they were all startups, but we'll call them incumbents, like Gong and other players are sort of in this arms race to infuse more AI into their current offerings. And then on the flip side, we're seeing a bunch of different startups popping up, focused primarily on point solutions that they think they can deliver better, and they're eating up a little bit of market share. How do you think this plays out? We'll start with in the revenue tech landscape, and then maybe we'll try and wrestle with more broadly in the B2B landscape.
Yeah, I think like many new technologies, we're still in the phase where there's a lot of noise and a lot of companies and startups trying to figure out what this new technology could bring to the market. This is by far, I think the data suggests like the fastest adopted technology ever. Hundreds of millions of people are using some form of AI, whether it's ChatGPT or other ways. So the potential is huge. I think some of the fundamentals, though, of what makes a great business solution have not changed, meaning what is the actual value? What is the deeper value that you're bringing to your customers? And I think there's sometimes confusion where it's like a technology in search of a problem versus are you actually, solving a real problem for your customers. And I think most solutions today are at the stage where they're optimizing basically the way to summarize or generate simple content from a lot of data. So they're very appealing to the end user. If I can help you write an email, I'm going to save time for you. It may not be the perfect email. I don't think we know. A lot of solutions are focusing on that. Like I'll give you a good enough draft for you to think about, so it would save you time. I think where we haven't seen yet a lot of progress is the deeper value. And this is where we focus a lot of our effort. Not just summarizing data from a lot of different sources, but bringing it to the right people at the right time with actionable insights. So if you're a revenue leader, maybe I can summarize my previous call with a prospect, but summarizing what's happening across the entire interaction with an account is much harder. If I can tell you what I suggest that you do in order to win the account, that's much more valuable, but it's also much, much harder to do. Most solutions I see in the marketplace today focus on the first piece. Let me save you a little bit of time by summarizing something or suggesting a nugget you can use. The deeper value is much, much harder. And I think the lesson in B2B a lot of times that solutions, in order to scale and to drive real value, they need to be part of a workflow. They need to be part of a solution that drives value consistently. And I think we have ways to go there. This is where we focus a lot of our effort, right? What is the strategic value? What is the workflow we can optimize? How we can make people more, not just more productive by saving time, but winning more, learning better, etc. So I think the potential is huge, but I think we're only barely in the first iteration of solutions. We'll need to go much, much deeper, and it gets harder as you try to drive deeper and deeper value.
Yeah, so embedding in the workflow is huge. And the other thing I think a lot about too, which I think, Gong's going to benefit greatly from, and some of the bigger players that have a larger customer base that are taking more actions in their platform is this proprietary data set that can train the artificial intelligence and the machine learning behind the scenes. A lot of these new entrants I'm seeing, even if they're thinking more broadly in the way that you described, of like, we're going to derive these deep insights from understanding across the whole org, and we're going to be able to map your accounts and take the next best action. But we're reliant upon all of these other platforms to give us their data. And I don't think it's crazy to see a world where people get more rigid with their access to data, and allowing it to flow in and out of their systems. And if that happens, a lot of these startups, like, you're done. You're not even just plateauing, like you're going to zero, basically. How do you think about, when you look at the landscape, like, if there's actions not being taken in the platform that you created, there's no data or systems of record for you to train things on. How do you think about that in terms of kind of the broader landscape and the impact that might have?
Yeah, that's an amazing point, right? You can use OpenAI and public data to a certain point, right? Again, if I need you to help me write an email, but I want this to feel more formal or less formal, you can probably rely on public models. There's enough examples out there to help you. But if you're trying to write the best email that fits Scott because you know exactly what previously was discussed and you know a lot about Scott's business and you know about what worked and didn't work for your own sales team in previous conversations, you have to have very high quality data and a lot of it. So if you don't own the data, it's actually very hard to have access to it because, as you mentioned, that data is becoming siloed. A lot of systems actually don't really have the most valuable data that you could use for those type of things because it's not just about the inputs and the outcomes. It's about all of the interactions and all of the context around it. That's how we think about people, right? I don't just look at a spreadsheet when I'm trying to think, how do I send my next email to Scott? If I've had previous conversations with you, I know exactly what's important to you. I have the context, right? And I agree. If you're only using public data and you're not in a position that you can over time build a huge data set that you have some advantage in analyzing or having access to, I don't think you can build a very deep solution. So I think incumbents have an advantage in this day and age if you actually have access to all of this data. It's very hard to gather that data. There's a perpetual motion here. If you're too small, it's hard for you to drive value to your customers if you don't have the data. So there is, scale has a lot of benefits in this world.
Who do you think the biggest winners are going to be? So I really like, for example, like the cross section of vertical B2B SaaS solutions mixed with artificial intelligence. I think there's going to be some big winners in some of these, I guess, like underserved verticals, like agriculture tech and things that were just, they didn't have a lot of great solutions, and they were, we'll call it software 2.0 wasn't really adopted that well. And now artificial intelligence just makes everything kind of easier to use. You can talk with it like you would talk with a human. And so I think adoption is going to go up. Any other winners you see in the short term?
Well, I think if you combine the trend around AI and what we're seeing in the market today, where there's basically a very strong trend to consolidation, I think we're seeing the price that customers have been paying over the past, 5 to 10 years by choosing a lot of point solutions. But a lot of them were not adopted well. They're not interconnected well. So the productivity gains that you should have seen from point solutions is actually caused a lot of teams to have lower productivity. So I think if you're trying to capture a big market, I think you have to think about capturing a very wide range of use cases for your customers. So you would have an end-to-end data flow, so you know what happens throughout a lot of what's happening in their business. And you can provide much better solutions because you can get better adoption, people work within a single solution, etc., and you become an expert and kind of a core piece in their tech stack. I think that's one thing. The second thing, I completely agree with you. I think again, during the heydays where money was cheap and everyone was adopting a lot of different tools, a lot of companies focused on their own sector, meaning tech companies selling to other tech companies. That market is great, but it's finite, and there's a huge opportunity outside of tech, whether it's like brick and mortar businesses, manufacturing, you mentioned agriculture, food tech, etc., where a lot of the previous generations of technology were not adopted because they couldn't afford to adopt 5 different solutions and have someone come in and build the workflows and customize it to their needs. They just couldn't afford it. They don't have the time, the experience, or the money to do it. So I think vertical solutions are going to definitely be on the rise. And I think AI, with some of the more conversational interfaces you can start building with them, should help as these interfaces become better for non-tech employees to adopt technologies.
Agreed. Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like two seemingly conflicting ideas where like one of the biggest beneficiaries is going to be horizontal platforms that have a broad range of features, and you're living all in one platform. Efficiency goes up, and that's also you're collecting even more data because more actions are happening. And so in that world, it's almost a scary world because it feels like a winner takes all. Like once you escape velocity in that world, your AI is going to outcompete everyone else's, LLM pretty fast. And then maybe that's paired with some of these hyper verticalized solutions, and that becomes like the new tech stack of the future is this all in one platform, and then you pick your verticalized solution. But well, we could play sort of Nostradamus all day and try and predict the future, and it's always super interesting and intellectually, stimulating. But I do really want to talk about, your experience at Gong. It's very unique to have such an incredible run that you have had at Gong. Congrats, by the way, 8 years. It's been cool to kind of have a front row seat with you, Udi, and Amit, building this behemoth of a company, partnering together, and then somewhat competing together. And now we're all play nicely in the sandbox again. What's been just like the most surprising part of growing Gong over the last 8 years?
I think from a company perspective, I think we were all surprised in the first few years how quickly, companies adopted the technology and how quickly we saw that adoption curve accelerate. I think we're all excited to start building the company, but I think if we're honest, we didn't think we would grow so quickly in such a new category that no one was there before. And Amit, our CEO, keeps mentioning it to everyone that it wasn't a slam dunk to get Gong funded. Like the first few rounds were not trivial, right? It wasn't like an idea that everyone said like this is going to be a gangbuster. We have to invest, right? We had a lot to prove to get to where we are. So that was one that was super cool. The thing for me personally, I've never been at the company for so long, and at different stages throughout the company growth, I always ask myself, how do I keep growing myself, right? And very different types of challenges when your first couple of years in an early stage startup versus, 1,500 people, thousands of customers, like the level of scale. I needed to learn a lot, and kind of my own learning about myself is like, how do I keep myself growing? How do I keep myself challenged. How do I navigate where I want to go next, and where do I feel like I can add the most value to the company? I didn't have that experience previously, and I never knew if you had asked me 8 years ago, would I, feel that I'm contributing and I'm growing in a company that's gone to that size. I don't know what my answer would be. Probably, I would say probably not, because I kind of considered myself a like early stage startup. And I found like a huge amount of growth and fun, and enjoyed every minute of the later growth stage as well. So a lot of learnings about myself as well during that journey.
I can imagine. What was did you have any sort of like intentional practices around making sure you were still personally growing? Like, did you get it growth from communities? Did you just sit down and reflect? Did you, meditate every day? Like, how did you keep going?
From a professional perspective, what I found that worked for me, and I had these moments, I don't know, once or twice a year when I'm like, the challenge ahead is so big and I've never done that before. How do I get there? And the pattern that I found is, first of all, breaking the challenge to smaller pieces, and then being very deliberate to going out there and just finding people that have done it in like amazing companies, and just talk to anyone who would give me the time. Whether it's just people in the network and just exchanging ideas, whether it's like, how do I hire the next amazing, leader that would come and join my team and bring something that we don't have, or, build a new function or a new process that we don't have experience with. And a lot of them, this is how I hired the best leaders I brought in. I first like interviewed a lot of people just for me to learn. And during that time, I kind of identified and connected people that later was able to bring in, and they completely changed how we work and allowed us to scale to the next level. So on the professional side, that was really a pattern that helped me. And I was like, don't be shy, talk to anyone. Especially when Gong had a big brand, sometimes people looked at me like, why are you asking me? Like, you should already know this, right? But, successful companies still, you're all trying to figure it out. You don't have all the answers. So I think going up and learning is one. I think personally, there were definitely times that were more stressful. And then I like to be outdoors. So I would spend weekends trying to decompress by being outdoors, or going out for a walk in the evening to kind of, decompress. I did meditate in some cases in the mornings, where I felt like this is something that helped me ground myself and start the day. So different methods and different times. But yeah, you definitely need to take care of yourself as well during that journey. It's not easy.
Definitely not easy. Yeah. Gotta find ways to keep the tank full, whatever way works for you. And yeah, I mean, just going. I've always done that my whole career. Whatever big daunting challenge that is in front of you, like someone's done that. Actually, a lot of people probably have done some variation of that. There are maybe a few net new problems that are very hyper contextual to what you're experiencing, but usually someone will have a shared or lived experience. And I mean, that's part of the reason we do this podcast, is to try and share some of those for people that might be going through a big challenge. And so that, I guess, naturally sort of leads us to the next point, which is kind of the story part of the podcast. And I know, we were talking earlier, and when you were sort of younger in your leadership and your management of people, you were trying to recruit someone, and it didn't really go as planned. Do you want to maybe fly back to that point in time and set the stage for kind of that time?
Yeah. So this was many years ago, but still one of my best personal learnings that I had during my career. And the story is that I was trying to recruit someone to move from another group to my group. a really talented leader that I really wanted us to work together. And we've had a few conversations, and I thought they were going really well, both personally and professionally. And then at the end of the day, he told me that he'd rather not join my team. And I asked him why. And he said, personally, I find that our conversations have been great, but you have a reputation of being like super, super aggressive. And that's not my style. And I'm not sure that's good for me. And I was shocked. I had no idea that this was the reputation that I got. And even worse, I didn't actually see the signs that I am being too aggressive. And, as a younger leader at the time, I was like super motivated, trying to get things done. And I was completely oblivious to how, this was projecting to my team and other people that I work with. And I thought I had pretty good self-awareness, but that kind of shattered it in a way. And it was an amazing learning for me because I became much more deliberate in actually asking questions and trying to actually get honest feedback and do something about it. And I think one of the best things as a leader for you to be aware of that your self-awareness is not the entire picture. You have to go out there and you have to be very deliberate about getting feedback because you're always missing something. So to me, again, that was a huge blind spot to me, and hopefully it helped me do better later on in my career.
It's a big one, and kind of actually a fairly common theme that we kind of hear on this podcast is either it was too aggressive in my own career or too aggressive in my leadership style, and sometimes it takes a while to figure that out. And it's kind of the old saying, "You don't know what you don't know," and so you might be, self-aware in what you know, but there's a whole other, realm of things that you don't know. So from that learning, how have you sort of implemented it? Because it can be difficult. You're an EVP. You're this almost mythical figure at Gong. How do you find the ability to create space for honest feedback? Because it can be tough for someone to tell you, "Hey, Eran, you're being too aggressive. I know we've got these goals. I know we have to hit this crazy number, but the way you're going about it might be too aggressive." How do you open those doors? Because that's a tough thread to needle to thread. Sorry.
I think that's both personally and as companies grow. I think it's actually one of the challenges that as we grew as a company, we had to think of, because you're right. When you're small, people kind of get to know you on a personal level, right? And if you act the way that you want, people to perceive you and experience you, then you're in pretty good shape. But when the company grows bigger, and by definition, you don't have enough time to actually get to know everyone, and not everyone get to know you. And the company has whatever 4, 5, 6 layers sometimes between you and someone that you may want to talk to. It becomes really challenging. From me at the personal level, there's a few things that I'm trying to do. One is just have, treat people as just people, right? When you talk to someone, it doesn't matter if it's a call, that the business call together, or just like whatever, you meet someone in the coffee in the office, and try to make sure people don't feel there's some sort of a distance between you, and that you talk about the stupid things that happened to you over the weekend like anyone else, and just treat people as you would treat anyone else. I think when the company grows, you have to be more deliberate about creating a connection. So whether you have like random one-on-ones with people, or you encourage people to connect more. People reach out to me on Slack. "Hey, can I get your help with this account?" I was like, "Of course, that's amazing. Let's hop on a 5-minute call." Or I try to make this personal at the same time that I'm trying to help people during their work and create a personal connection. And the other thing, at least for me, at least when, especially when I had a much bigger team, is create some structure around actually getting feedback, whether it's direct one-on-one from other people that I work with, or I even had a way that people could submit like anonymous thought feedback to me, because I acknowledge that even though I'm always open to talk to people, some people might find it intimidating, or it would take a pretty high bar of a problem or a challenge that they're facing for them to actually come to me. So sometimes maybe do that anonymously. So I think that's number two. And number three, when you build a big enough organization, it's not just about you, it's about the people you hire. And we invested a huge amount in Gong, making sure that we hire people that have the same, what we call operating principles, that are not just something that we put on the wall, that people they do care about other people, they act the way that we expect them to act. And if you have that throughout the organization, people assume that whether it's me or a CEO, that we're not just playing a game, we're actually accessible. We want to listen, we want to learn, we're open for feedback. So it can't just remain at your level, it has to permeate across the entire organization, from individual contributors to first-line managers to everyone in between, to make sure that you're not creating those fake buffers. And the worst thing that could happen to a company is that you have sort of your whatever operating principles or whatever you call them, but it's just something that you put on the wall and no one really expects them to be true. That creates a lot of challenges inside a company, because you lose trust with everyone that you work with, that everything else that you're saying is not true as well.
If everyone is living by those principles, it almost becomes like self-policing, because then if something is not abiding by those principles, it's very apparent. You can see it right away. Versus if they're not, you're kind of all just running around in the dark, trying your best. But that's all fantastic advice, and thank you for sharing that story. So we do have a section where founders can submit questions, and for listeners, if you're a founder or a revenue leader, you can submit questions at questions@gtmfund.com. I thought this one would be great for you, because I feel like Gong hit this pretty early on. And the question is, when do you know when you have true product market fit?
We call it raving fans. This is like the very visceral feeling that we got. There's a lot of metrics that you can put in place, but when you're starting to feel the pull from your customers that they want you to do more, they want to introduce you to their network, they want you to take more workflows, or get you to do things outside of your current core. I think this is kind of a magical moment, that it's not just that you're driving value to them with exactly where you are today, but they're bought into where you're going. And they want to be part of that journey. So in some ways, it's even deeper than product market fit. There are a lot of solutions out there that got to product market fit, but kind of stayed stagnant from that point on, because there wasn't like a clear path for their customers to see that product fit into a much bigger part of their business than it currently does. So to me, this is like the real product market fit. It's not just where you are today. This is a wedge that could grow to something much bigger. And I think that's really what you're looking for in an early stage startup, because you're only 1% of your vision is really out there. So to get that dynamic and that energy from your customers, that they want to push you to move faster and do more, I think that this is really it. We felt it from the end users and our customers fairly early on, where frankly, we were concerned that people would not want to record any of their calls, and how do we overcome those objections. And when we started seeing that the number one support ticket that we had was, why was my call not recorded? then we knew we're onto something, because people just wanted to get more and more value versus, you know, blocking us or containing us in just a simple or like a narrow use case. So it might not be the official, definition of product market fit, but to me, this is the magical moment that at an early stage that you're looking for.
Yeah. I like that way of looking at it. And it's almost like, there's no better feeling in the world, I imagine, when you had that like first raving fan and you're like, oh shit, it's happening. And I remember going on LinkedIn back in like, I don't know, 2018, and there'd be people posting about Gong. And I was like, wait, they're talking about a software company. The way they were talking about it, and it was like unprompted. This was not like, the case studies or anything. It was like they were talking about a new car they bought or some sort of consumer product. And I think it was one of the first times I was like, wow, people can love software that much. It was pretty cool, even just to watch from the outside. So it must have been crazy internally.
It was so much fun. It still is. We're still getting those like crazy, really raving fans that want us to do more. And can you take over this part of my business? And can you do this? And when would be able to do that? This is where you really know that you hit a nerve that goes a long way, right? It's not just what you're doing now. This helps you create relationships with the market and with customers for years and years to come.
Yeah. And these raving fans, they're almost like mini sellers for you now, right? They're opening up all these introductions for you. And then they also become like mini product managers because they're telling you all these features they want. And so you all of a sudden just have this army that extends far beyond just your internal employees, which just has a compounding effect over time, which is cool. All right, this has been awesome. As we sort of wrap up, I always ask the same two questions, and the first one is, what is one thing that revenue leaders or founders believe to be true that you think is bullshit or outdated or no longer serving us?
I still see a lot of revenue organizations where they don't actually try to get answers through data, and or that they kind of, we see the data, we do a lot of data work with our customers, but sometimes it doesn't fit their mental model of what the answer should be. And a lot of people don't say that explicitly these day and age, because I think that's almost, you're expected to say that you believe the data, but you can see how you have a thesis and you're trying to force the data to fit into that versus actually using data as a real decision-making mechanism. And we see very clearly that, companies that rely on the data to help them make decisions are performing better, they're more agile, they take action, and they succeed. And there are definitely limits to data. You don't always have data about everything. But I still think the entire ecosystem around revenue is pretty mature in that area yet, right? There has to be a much deeper change. I think we're seeing that in marketing over the past 20 years, where marketing is very much a science. There's still a lot of creativity, etc., but the data leads the way in terms of like what works, what doesn't work, how do we test things, how do we go about our business. This is a huge gap, I think, on the revenue side still.
Yeah, it feels like if we were all honest with ourselves, the last, decade has just been collecting data and not using a lot of it. And you're totally right. You use that data when it's convenient for you to back into the answer that you want anyway. And hopefully this new era that we're going into, which kind of takes us full circle to what we were talking to at the beginning, is a lot of these new technological advancements are going to finally let us weaponize or take action on that data. Because frankly, I just don't think that people had the skill set, right? If you're a revenue leader, you're not a data scientist, so you don't actually know how to correctly interact with large swaths of data, and now we should be able to, which is certainly exciting.
100%. Data is hard, and I think AI could and should help us use data in ways that we couldn't have done before unless you had a huge team of data scientists, which most companies don't have. So I think this is going to be a real breakthrough, and hopefully we'll be able to, with everything that we talked about, adoption of data and using AI to recommend what you should be doing and distill the insights. That would be the next revolution, I think, in revenue.
Totally. Well, it's going to be a fun 2024 to see this all play out. Final question before I let you go is a lot of people are struggling right now. It's a hard time to grow. Budgets are still kind of constricting. Headcounts are still lowering. It's just a tough time for a lot of folks. And so what's one go-to-market tactic or strategy that's been working for Gong recently?
I think for us, for sure, one of the main things that we're leveraging and resonates really well in the market is, the consolidated platform that we provide. So the messaging around it, where, you can leverage a single platform that relies on what's truly happening in your interactions with your customers to drive anywhere from prospecting to forecasting to coaching and bettering your team. That resonates across the board and kind of goes back to our conversation where a few years ago you can buy multiple tools and none of them were really adopted all the way, but you could kind of live with that. I think today you have to be much more deliberate around how you think about value, how you think about cost, and how you help customers getting better ROI for their investment. So that's been working really well for us in this day and age, and I think it's not going away anytime soon.
I agree. Yeah, lean heavily into that. If you're fortunate enough to be listening to this and you have a platform and not a more of a point solution, don't hesitate to fully embrace that, consolidation messaging. It's super, super, super powerful right now because pretty much every leader I know is trying to cut tech spend and simplify their tool stack. So if you can tell them exactly what they're looking for, that's going to be helpful. Well, Eran, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're a busy man, so really, really appreciate it. This has been a fun conversation, and I think this will probably come out in the New Year's, but we're recording this just before the holidays. So I hope you have a wonderful holidays with your friends and family.
Thank you, Scott. It's been a pleasure, and happy holidays to you and the GTM Fun team.
Thank you, my friend. And I'll go give your son a hug for you. And for all the listeners, thank you all for joining us. I always say it, but listing's one thing, executing is completely different. Take some things we talked about, contextualize it for your business, put it into action, and we will see you all next week.